Why is my face this color? I don't even self-tan. What is happening to my face? Hello, it's Em. Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to the channel. I hope you stick around. We're at 70 subscribers, and my goal just for the year is to get to 100. So if you haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate it if you would. I try not to overwhelm you with videos. My goal is to post once a week. Sometimes I post a couple times a week. Sometimes you'll get little shorts about my cat. But anyway, this video is my March March wrap up. This is I read 4 books and I have my first DNF of the year. So we will talk about those in this video. My goal is 60 books over the course of the year. That's my Goodreads reading goal. Sorry, I'm bumping my desk around here. So that's an average of 5 books a month. So I fell a little short this month, but I'm still ahead for the year. I've read 21 books so far this year, so I have a little bit of breathing room. And hopefully in the next month, it's tough. My son's track season is happening. We're about to go away on spring break to Universal. So I don't anticipate getting a lot of reading done while we're at the amusement park. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe just on the plane rides I'll be able to read, although a lot of times my kids don't give me that opportunity when I'm like sitting with them on a plane. They usually want to talk. So it's good. It's good that my kids want to talk to me. So, you take those opportunities when you can, because they're all teenagers now, and we're getting to that stage of not wanting to talk. That said, let's talk about the books I read in March. So I'm going to go in the order that I finished the books, because a lot of the time I am reading at least a couple at a time, like kind of going back and forth between a couple books, sometimes even 3 books at a time. So the first book I finished in March was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is a YA queer identity, black main character. So it was at my library as a date with a book, so it was like wrapped in paper, and it said prom and identity and stuff like that, and I found that interesting, so I picked it up. And I had heard of it when I unwrapped it. I was like, I've heard of this book. So it is about a main character. She's a senior in high school. Her name is Liz Lighty. Some of the names in the book, I think there was like a Jennings. Jordan Jennings, and so, like, it was a little bit of the comic book alliteration naming convention. But Liz is a senior. She is one of the few black kids in a relatively wealthy Indiana small town school district. Campbell is the name of the town, I think. It's definitely the name of the school, at least. She is banking on this scholarship to go to the college she really wants to go to. It was her late mother's alma mater, and she really wants to go and follow in her mother's footsteps. Her mother died of sickle cell anemia, and her younger brother also has sickle cell anemia, so Liz would like to become a hematologist. But she also really loves music. She's a band student. All of this, I promise it's not spoiler, it's all kind of backstory, because in the first chapter she finds out that she didn't get the scholarship and she needs to find another way to bridge her financial aid to go to this college, and her brother suggests she run for prom queen, because apparently they take it very seriously in this town, and the prom, if you win, it comes with like money. Who knew? Now, I grew up in Texas, and football's a big deal, and we had a homecoming court, but I do not, for the life of me, remember there being a prom court. I could just not remember, although as yearbook editor, you'd think that would be a spread that I would remember having to make. And I remember, at the very least in my senior yearbook, what the prom page looked like, and I do not remember anything about a prom court. It was all homecoming for us. So to me, this felt very strange, but I don't know if that's just because it's different in different places. I know the author is from the Midwest, so maybe prom really is a big deal there. Anyway, if you can get past the fact that they're making this big deal out of prom and that it involves like a certain amount of community service and other functions just to, narrow the long list down to the finalists, and then it gets announced the big night of prom. It's cute. It's a cute book. I liked that the main character was Black and queer, but not out to her family yet, and then a new girl moves into town and Liz gets a crush on her, and that becomes kind of a difficulty because the prom rules say no same-sex couples. So that, those were interesting to me, storylines, but there were a lot of characters, and I didn't feel like all of them contributed necessarily to the story. I felt like some could have been condensed. And I also felt like the ending was maybe a little too tidy and pat. The writing felt more upper middle grade than true YA to me. At the same time, though, it was very entertaining. It was a very fast read, fast paced. Crowley, you're not going in there. Dude, no. I guess he's going in there. See my wrapping paper? That's where I keep the wrapping paper. Crowley! Anyway, at the end of the day, I gave this book a 4.5 stars. Like, it was actually hugely entertaining, even for all the hang-ups I might have had about it. I realize I'm more severe towards books than a lot of people would be. So sorry for that. Comes from working in publishing as an editor. But overall, like, entertainment value, representation, diversity, and just the readability of it made it high on my list. I gotta get the cat out of the closet. So the next book I finished in one day. It was really short. It was a quick read. It was The Reason I Jump by Naoki Higashida. I read it in translation, although I could try the Japanese. I don't think I'm quite that far yet in my Japanese. Maybe if there were furigana. So every year my city chooses a book to read citywide. It's, the read together kind of thing, and this was the book they chose. It's from 2006 or 7 originally. I think the translation was from like 2013 maybe. But and so at that time in 2006 or 7 when it came out, the boy who wrote it was 13 and autistic, and he attempts in this book to answer questions about autism and give his perspective. So it's written in a question and answer format where, I guess people submitted questions and he attempted to answer them. As somebody on the spectrum, I thought it would be interesting to see how our experiences jive and if he had some of the same interpretations of why he does the things he does or how he feels about the things he feels about. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, just to see how much of our experiences match. But I have to keep in mind that he was 13. He was a boy, and he was living and growing up in Japan, which is a very different culture. It's a very communal culture, whereas the individuality of the American culture creates a very different feeling towards or about people who are autistic or in other ways different from the norm, neuroatypical or atypical even, you know, in other ways. So I agreed, I would say, with about half of what he wrote, or at least identified with half. I wouldn't say agree. You can't really agree or disagree with somebody else's interpretation or experience. But I would say I identified with about half of it. He spent a lot of time saying, hey, don't give up on us. We really, you know, and I think that's definitely coming from a cultural place. I don't know that I ever felt, if you've watched my autism video, and I will link it somewhere or below, you'll know that I was fortunate enough to be part of a pilot program that kind of catered to my differences because they saw my differences as a certain number of strengths and gifts, and so that's really fortunate for me. I understand that a lot of people in the system struggle either by not being diagnosed or by being diagnosed but not getting the support they need. My youngest is on the spectrum, and it's been a thing. So yeah, I think it was interesting. It was a quick read, the question and answer format, and you know, everybody's experience of autism, people who are on the spectrum, people who aren't, is going to be different because everybody is different. Autism is a number of symptoms. It's not a narrow diagnosis, it's very broad. And then people who have known autistic people, their experience with autism will also be different because each autistic person is different. So we may have a lot of things in common and we may not, if any of this makes sense. So overall, I gave this book a 3.5. I do think it's worth a read, just to see from the autistic point of view what somebody might feel, think. Some of the questions were very strange to me too, but I got the sense that Higashira's autism was maybe a little bit, I don't want to say severe, but like more acute, let's say, than mine. I can kind of pass off pretty well. It takes a lot out of me to mask and be out in the world, and I have to come home and hole up and so some of the questions wouldn't have applied to me because, like, some of the like spinning around and, you know, flapping your hands, I have less obvious tell. I pick my cuticles. That's my big like fidget. That kind of thing. Yeah, and you know, asking like, would you wish to be normal? And I was like, well, I only know life the way I know life, so I can't anticipate what normal would feel like. And I also don't think normal is really a thing. I think normal is an arbitrary zero, and it's all kind of relative to your culture and where you live and societal standards in the place you live, right? So yeah, anyway, like I said, 3.5, definitely worth a read. Identified with a fair amount. It ends with a very interesting kind of allegorical story that Higashira writes, that I'm not entirely sure I understood what was being said, but I still found it very interesting. And like I said, quick read too. It's less than 200 pages, and a lot of those pages, there's some art in there, and a lot of those pages are only like half pages because he answers the question in very few words or something, and then they move on to the next question. So it doesn't take long to read, and it's an interesting perspective. The third book I finished was Anne Perry and the Murder of the Century, which was originally titled so brilliantly Clever Parker Home and the Murder That Shocked the World. That was like the New Zealand title, because it covers, if you ever saw Heavenly Creatures, it covers the Parker Home murder of Parker's mother in New Zealand in 1954, and the fact that Holm went on to become the author Anne Perry. I met Anne Perry at a writing event where we were both guest authors. Obviously, she was way more up the list than I was, but there was a lull, and we were out on the author floor together, like the sales tables. And so a fellow writer and I got up the courage to go talk to her, and I found her, you know, quite nice. We talked about cats, I think, and nothing very, it was all very surface level. I came home and my husband was like, well, did you ask her what it was like to murder somebody? And I was like, that would have been unprofessional. So I just don't feel like that's something she necessarily wants to rehash. And she definitely was guarded, I would say. I don't know if some of that is the kind of superiority complex that she often gets attributed with. I can't say it was like all of 10 minutes. She did inscribe a book for me to read, and I read it, and what was that, Face of a Stranger? It was very good. I mean, she's a good writer. I'll give her that for sure. Anyway, that's my little Anne Perry story. This book is kind of one of the only books I could find about the crime. I'm sure others exist. I don't know if they're just not readily available. But like when I was looking for something to read that kind of told the whole story, this is the book I found. And I would say it spends a lot of time, it's very, journalistic and very in-depth. It spends a lot of time kind of talking about both girls' family history and past and their illnesses and their bond. And I found all of that way more interesting than when we got to the trial, which Peter Graham is the author of this book, and he kind of belabors the trial with like almost word for word, like from transcripts, like what was said. And at that point I did get a little bit like bored with it. I was like, just give me the gist. But in that way, this book is very thorough. And then there's a little bit at the end about what happened to, obviously Holm became Anne Perry, and Parker went on under another name as well, and went on to kind of live a hermit-like life. And yeah, I'm interested in true crime. This was kind of one of those key true crime, Leopold and Loeb and like this, those were kind of key true crime moments of an era. So it was a good book, but it is slow, it's dense. It was slow to read. I mean, I was reading that. I think I picked it up at the end of February, and I didn't finish it till almost the end of March, because it just, you couldn't read more than like 10 or 15 pages at a time. People following my Goodreads would be like, why is she updating every 10 pages? But like, honestly, 10 pages felt like a triumph, because there is just a lot of material to go through in this book. I gave it a 3.8 stars overall, because it covered the information well, even if in places it gave me more than I wanted. That's better than not giving me as much as I want in something like this. So yeah, that was, I think they made the title change for like I don't know if it's just the American, but obviously the name Anne Perry is more likely to sell books than Parker Holm, because they didn't necessarily assume that readers over here would know about that murder, right? So anyway, the final book that I actually read and finished during March was All's Well by Mona Awad. I've never read anything by her before. I've heard of Bunny and this one. This one, like, because it had a Shakespeare, underpinning to the story, was why I picked it up. I was like, oh, maybe I'll like it more than If We Were Villains. I did not. I'll just say that right now. So This book is, I guess, literary fiction, women's, I'm not sure where it's classified because it's kind of an odd, maybe it's slipstream, but it's about Miranda, because you can't have a freaking Shakespeare book without somebody being named Miranda, I guess. Um, and Miranda is a like assistant professor at a small liberal arts college where the theater program has been reduced. She has chronic pain after an accident. She used to be a performer. She used to do Shakespeare. She has chronic pain after falling off the stage while playing Lady Macbeth. And her greatest moment, however, was playing Helen in All's Well That Ends Well at the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. That's where she met her husband, and now her ex-husband. And, you know, that was kind of, she peaked, right? That was where she peaked. So she's in chronic pain after falling off the stage, a botched hip surgery, you know, and many bouts of physical therapy and seeing various doctors and taking all these meds. So she's kind of always out of it. And she's planning to, you know, direct All's Well That Ends Well with the students. The students want to do Macbeth, which, I mean, you know, there's obviously a dichotomy here for Miranda, who All's Well That Ends Well, Macbeth was her downfall, right? So, but it's all written from Miranda's point of view, so it's all very stream of consciousness. And then when she's like on meds or addled or whatever, it gets repetitive and it gets a little bit, I don't know. There are a lot of interesting themes going on here. The kind of underlying commentary on women, how women are treated in the medical system in America, how women aren't taken seriously when they talk about their pain, or, you know, things like that. There's the question, we get into some magical realism where, like, pain being transferred from one person to another. I'm not going to go into the details in case you want to read it. I don't want to give anything away, but, like, it's kind of like, would you wish it on your worst enemy? But also, like, the be careful what you wish for kind of stuff going on. You know, I was with it up until about 60% into the book. And then, like, because it was getting repetitive because there was, I mean, I'm not a prude, but there's just this, like, lot of focus on sex, and I was just like, I ended up starting to skim to get to the pieces of plot just to see what was actually going to happen, because we were spending so much time in Miranda's head that I was just like, just what happens next? Like, that's all I wanted to know. I mean, I wanted to see how it ended, but I did not need just the constant, her laying in bed and her constant, like, paragraphs and paragraphs of thought. Like, I was just like, I'm over this. You know, what's the next thing that happens? So, yeah. So, I mean, you know, I gave it a 3.6, but I'm not even sure I liked it enough for that. I might need to revise that downward. The more I think about it, the less I actually enjoyed this book. Like, it had an interesting story, and yet there's something about the way it was executed that by the end of it, I was just like, ugh, just end already. All's well that ends. Just, I don't even care if it ends well, just end. But, you know, it's an ambiguous story, so if you're looking for a solid answer to all the weirdness that's going on in this book, you're not going to get it. Don't waste your time if that's going to bother you. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I did not like it more than If We Were Villains. I'd say I liked them about the same in different, not even. Okay, so if somebody were to say you have to reread one of these, I would reread If We Were Villains rather than this. I thought that the characters in If We Were Villains were very kind of single-sided. I don't know what's the word. Like they're just like, they were caricatures. They were not deep. In this case, because we're stuck with Miranda the whole time, it just wasn't. It just wasn't. I mean, I felt bad for Miranda because people weren't taking her pain seriously, but at the same time, I could kind of see their point of, dude, stop wallowing, and like, maybe some of this is in your head. I could definitely see both sides of that. At the same time, I wanted Miranda to succeed, so there is that, but as the story went on, I like less and less wanted to just spend time with her. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that's like, when you hear somebody who's a chronic complainer, you can't be surprised when people cease to want to spend time in their company, right? I don't know. Maybe that was the point. Some of this, the way this was done felt very like, there's not a lot of subtlety in the themes, and the All's Well versus Macbeth stuff. If you know Shakespeare anyway, it's not very subtle. And again, maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe that wasn't the point. But like, if you have a clock and it's got a clear case and you can see all the gears, that's kind of interesting. But it takes away from telling the time because you're focused on the gears. And it places in this book I was like so busy looking at the gears and the mechanics of the story that like the story itself ceased, because I was like, didn't care about Miranda's internal monologue anyway. Like, I was more interested in the gears. Okay, anyway, so that was it. Like I said, I gave it a 3.6. I might go down over time. And that just leaves us with the book I DNF'd. So I have my first DNF of the year, and it's a book called Innate Magic by Susanna Fay. I did not get very far in this book, like the first chapter maybe, but like I picked it up at the library. I read the like back of it, and it sounded interesting, and I was in a time crunch, so I didn't really have time to just like even read a couple pages and see if I wanted it. I just like, I'll take it. If I don't like it, it's the library. I can return it. That's the great thing about libraries. You're not out any money. So it is about, because I enjoyed A Marvelous Light so much, I thought this might be something I also enjoyed, because it's set in, I don't say Victorian or Edwardian England, but some kind of past-ish England. And the main character is a magician, but his magic is with tailoring, like clothing, like some kind of clothing magic. It sounded really interesting, and then like I read the first chapter and I just didn't care for the writing style at all. It just wasn't for me. So I don't even know if you could count it as a DNF, because I didn't even get very far, but it started in a place where like they're walking into a house and talking about something that happened right before, where they got attacked by these men, and I'm like, why wouldn't you just start the book with the attack then? Like, why would you literally start in the moments after like the interesting thing and just have them talking about it? That just seemed like a really weird choice, and then I just didn't care for the way the dialogue was written. I don't know. It was one of those things where they like an exposition in dialogue or something like, I don't know. There's a lot of like exposition being thrown in there, both in dialogue and outside of dialogue, in ways that just didn't work for me. So that was my DNF. I think it's probably a good book for a lot of people. It just I think like probably there's a really good story in there, but I just couldn't make it past the writing style and some of the choices being made. So that was my DNF, and that was my March. I am reading a cozy mystery now that won't be finished before the end of March, which is why I just went ahead and made this video now, because I know I won't have finished anything else before the end of the month. And I've got a big old stack of stuff to read, and we will see what happens. In April, hopefully I get to at least 5 books in April, read a little faster, read a little more, maybe read something shorter. That Anne Perry true crime book just was so dense, and it just took a lot to go through, so maybe I'll read some shorter, swifter stuff this month as we get into better weather, and maybe it might finally be warm enough to be out by the pool by the end of the month, because where I live, usually by the end of April, we're able to swim. So anyway, if you've read any of these, let me know about it in the comments. Again, subscribe if you haven't. We'd love to have you join the channel. And thanks to everybody who has subscribed. Really appreciate it. And I will see you next time.